All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us in the 6th installment of the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab Spatial Data Science webinar series. This has been a really exciting series for me to put together, and I've really enjoyed all of the different topics that we've touched on. I'm particularly excited about today because I get to show off some of the work that I've been doing in terms of creating new spatial data resources for scientists at RMBL. And I'm hoping that this is going to be useful for folks to just understand what's out there, how to take advantage of it, and what sort of is coming down the pipe, what to expect in the next couple of months and a year or so. But before I dive into that, I want to emphasize that this is the 6th of 6, so we're almost done. And also that there are recordings available for all the previous 5 webinars. So if you haven't had a chance to check out all the different topics, we've got some really amazing stuff in there, from using GIS to design field studies, to how to make good drone flights, to what do we do with all this point cloud data, to how do we make predictive maps using machine learning. So a ton of different topics, and I hope they're useful to everyone. I also want to emphasize that this is probably something that we're going to do again, and I really, really want your feedback. So we put together a really brief participant survey for the webinar series. You can get to it at this link, and also I'll link to it by email. So please take about 5 minutes to give us feedback on what worked, what didn't work, and what topics you're really excited about seeing next year. I really appreciate it. Okay, so I guess the format for today's webinar is real similar to what we've done before. It's going to go from why to what to how, and the questions we're going to really try and answer are: why should you invest your time in learning spatial data science? I'm going to revisit some of the highlights from previous webinars and talk about some of the key reasons why we should be doing this in the first place. I'm going to talk about some of the things that I think are really cool about the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab Spatial Data Platform, which is one of the tools that we're using to make it easier for field-based scientists to use remote sensing and other spatial data. I just want to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about what new data products are available. We just have uploaded a ton of new products, and some of those are going to be useful for planning. Some of these are going to be useful for analysis. Some are going to be useful for knocking around the field. We just want to give you guys a sense of what's going on. I also want to give you a sense of where we're going in 2021 and 2022. We really have focused in the past year and a half or so on filling out the gaps in high resolution physiographic data. So we've been mapping land cover and canopy and topography, all the different ways we know how. And we're shifting towards using that data to really better analyze satellite-based observations of snow and land surface phenology, and also mapping microclimates. So I want to sort of give you guys a little bit more details about what we're doing there. And then I'm going to do some interactive stuff. So I'm going to show you guys how you find spatial data platform data sets, how you put them on a map in an open source GIS program. I'm also going to demo how we can take them out into the field using a mobile app called ArcGIS Field Maps. And then I'm also going to demo some ways that we can use these new data products in analysis programmatically in R. So it should actually be a little bit shorter of a presentation today. I'm not going to drop a bunch of new conceptual stuff on you guys, and really trying to emphasize the interactive stuff, so we get to play with maps. So that'll be fun. If you want to follow along with any of the demos, you're going to have to download the files that are in the GitHub repository for the site and open those up in QGIS and R. Otherwise, they should be easy to work through on your own independent time. Okay, so why did we spend 7 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours this past 6 months learning about spatial data science? And I think that there are a couple of highlights here that I want to revisit. The first is that observations of the landscape spatial data is becoming more and more abundant. you can sort of imagine the Earth as like Earth orbit is becoming kind of crowded with satellites. This is just the present and near future satellite launches from NASA's Earth observation program. And there are just a ton of different ways that we're collecting spatial data, mostly imagery data, but also other spatial data from active sensors like LiDAR and radar. That's just the space-based stuff. We're also getting increasingly data from airplanes and from even lower altitudes with drones. And these data sets are becoming more and more comparable to field data. So it used to be that when we were working with remote sensing based spatial data, we had this problem where our pixels were really large and our plots were really small. And that's starting to become less of an issue. And it's a great time to for field scientists to really understand how to take advantage of some of these new high resolution products. And the tools are also getting a lot better. So we have now open source and free GIS programs that are really powerful, packages for programming languages like R and Python that make it easy to access very large terabyte scale data sets in the cloud. And then there are large scale computing facilities like Google Earth Engine that make it possible for you to really analyze field scale data at continental scales, which is kind of crazy, right? I think it's really important, even if you're sort of not really excited about remote sensing per se, I think spatial data science is really powerful for making our field studies more rigorous. And the example that I hit on in webinar 2, which I want to revisit here, is that it really helps us clarify what our, I guess, what the population is that we're sampling from when we're designing a field study, right? So we can define a study area explicitly using a GIS. We can sort of make a bunch of spatial filters here to identify the types of environments that we want to sample. And we can use sometimes tools like Latin hypercube sampling to efficiently sample this, come up with study sites that can efficiently sample a landscape like this. And then we've actually got data that we know exactly what it represents. It is a random, it's a random, or it's another kind of sample of this particular sampling frame. And that allows us to much more rigorously perform our analysis and then talk about our analysis. I think the most important here is that spatial data science allows us to scale our science up to the scales that matter. So for the most part, nobody really cares about what's going on in your field plots, right? Our understanding should be of whole systems and how they interact to produce the goods that that humanity cares about. Flows of water, flows of carbon, flows of wildlife. All of these are larger scale questions. And so we can use spatial data science to scale our field observations up to larger scales to make inference at the scales that people actually care about. And so, we've talked about examples of managing cheatgrass, using satellite imagery to identify cheatgrass invaded environments that you can go out and control. We talked about examples where we're using remote sensing to scale up the effects of drought to continental scales. This is a map of canopy water content for the entire state of California. This is the kind of work that you can do if you get good at spatial data science. And so I'm hoping that the webinars that we've done are just going to give you guys a little bit of that baseline understanding of how this world works, so you can sort of get some leverage on it. It's not all gravy though. So the skills that you need to take advantage of remote sensing data are significant. And that really is the major motivation for doing this webinar series. We want to give people a little bit of leverage on new skills. But that's not the only challenge. There are a ton of different formats for spatial data. There are a ton of different software packages. Any given data set, you typically have to do a lot of kind of housekeeping operations to get it into the right shape to talk to other data, to incorporate into an analysis. And so I think of these as last mile problems. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing with RMBL is trying to solve those last mile problems, to assemble sets of spatial data that are much more straightforward to to assemble, to query, to compare against each other. And it means that you don't have to spend half of your time downloading and resampling and going through metadata and like trying to figure out what data means. We're going to create a spatial data platform that allows you to build on remote sensing tools without being a remote sensing whiz. That's the vision anyway. So that's what we're doing with the spatial data platform. We're creating a set of gridded environmental data for the Rumble domain that is high fidelity, high resolution, open, and citable. And that's a pretty heavy lift. It's gonna, take me quite a while to sort of get everything together for even the sort of first phase of the work that we've planned that goes about 3 years. But we've already made some progress, right? So we've developed some really high resolution land cover, canopy height, radiation, and snowpack products that we think are going to be really useful to the research community. And so my task today is really to help you guys understand what exactly these products are, how to take advantage of them, and sort of what we're doing next. First of all, like, where is this data? I work in Western Colorado in the Upper Gunnison Basin, and the data sets that I'm assembling for the most part are higher resolution than the data sets that are globally or nationally available. And so there are 3 different spatial domains that we're targeting. The first is on the left-hand side, the area around the Gothic town site. That is a focus of really intense research effort, and about 70% of our research sites of Rumble affiliated scientists actually have research exactly in this Gothic town site domain. So we're developing data products that try and treat this Gothic town site area as a special spot. So we're going to collect drone imagery and develop data products that have sub-meter resolution, and in some cases 3 to 5 centimeter resolution for the Gothic town site. If we zoom out a little bit from there to the Upper East River domain, that's the center map here, we're getting all the environments that are in the vicinity of the town of Crested Butte, including 4 watersheds: the Upper East River, Coal Creek, Washington Gulch, and Slate River, that are very well covered by airborne remote sensing. So we have LiDAR and actually several different LiDAR data sets, along with imaging spectroscopy data that allows us to do a ton of really cool things with vegetation mapping and vegetation ecological process mapping that we couldn't do otherwise. The largest domain is the Upper Gunnison River basin. Essentially, everything that drains into the Gunnison River upstream of the town of Gunnison, and this includes both the Upper East River drainage that's included in the second domain I talked about, along with the Taylor River and Ohio Creek drainages. That sort of allows you to grab environments that are both substantially drier and substantially wetter than the Upper East River. It also extends our focus a little bit to the north into some of the drainages of the Crystal River. And this is to capture areas that include Mexican Cut Nature Preserve and North Pole Basin. These are 2 intense sites of research interest that a lot of aquatic ecologists work in Mexican Cut. We're trying to expand work that's going on in North Pole Basin, and we want to cover those as well, even though they don't technically drain through the Gunnison system. They drain north up towards the town of Marble. So we're not going to be able to treat each of these spatial domains with an equal amount of detail. And so the Gothic town site, we're going to be developing these sub-meter products. Upper East River, mostly going to be 1 to 3 meter products, although there are some a little bit coarser than that that are based on satellite data. And then for the Upper Gunnison River domain, we're really focusing at a very wide variety of different spatial resolutions. And that reflects that some of the data sets we're using are from LiDAR or aerial imagery or other high resolution sources that are 1 or 3 meters. And then also coarser scale remote sensing from platforms like Landsat and Sentinel that have between 10 and 30 meter resolutions. I've set up these resolutions as all nested within each other in factors of 3. That essentially means that there are 9 1-meter pixels in every 3-meter pixel, and there are 9 3-meter pixels in every 9-meter pixel. That's got some advantages because it allows us to quantify heterogeneity in these products with a consistent methodology across a wide variety of scales. And the downside is that does not quite fit exactly with the resolution of the remote sensing product. So we have Sentinel data coming in at 10 meters and Landsat data coming in at 30 meters. So that's, we have to do a little bit of resampling there, but this is a kind of a cool nested multi-scale system. So the hope is that you're going to be able to choose the scale that's most appropriate for your research question and for your particular analysis. And you're not going to be necessarily constrained by the availability of high resolution data or the ability to aggregate data to any particular spatial domain. Okay, so we've made some progress on this already. So last May and June, we released, we're calling release 1 of the spatial data platform. And these were data sets that were mostly based on imaging spectroscopy and LiDAR data sets collected as part of the National Aerial Observatory Platform's field campaign field and remote sensing campaign that happened in 2018. So as part of this release 1, we developed a high resolution 1-meter land cover map. We also included some really basic canopy height information from LiDAR, along with a high resolution DEM and digital surface model as elevation maps essentially. And then we did some post-processing to develop stream flow lines and watersheds from this data. So overall, this is, I think, a really good place to start. But for the most part, these are not the data products that have the highest value to the research community at Rumble. They're just the things that we had the data for already, and they're the things that that we needed to do first before we get to the more interesting stuff. And so today, I'm really going to talk about the releases that we've just done. We're actually calling them 2 different releases, but they're being released simultaneously this month. We're calling them releases 2 and 3 that are out just in the last couple of days. So release 2 is really focused on that Upper East River domain. So we have some extra data sets that help enhance our vision of that Upper East River domain. We're also introducing a bunch of new data products for the larger Upper Gunnison domain. Yeah, I'm pretty excited to talk about both of those, although honestly, I've spent a ton more time and energy on the Upper Gunnison data sets, so we'll spend more time there than the Upper East River. But I just wanted to show you an example of some of these data sets. So on the left-hand side is a map of potential solar radiation on March 21st that is informed by LiDAR-based topography and vegetation structure information. So critically, this is a sub-canopy solar radiation model. So it estimates the amount of solar radiation that's incident at about 1 meter above the soil surface, I guess the ground surface. And it includes interactions with the atmosphere and topography, and interactions with the atmosphere and also interactions with the canopy. So we've used LiDAR data to estimate the canopy gap fraction, and used a pretty simple model of how light propagates through the canopy to come up with sub-canopy estimates. And so we've done this on March 21st under leaf-off conditions. And we've also done it at all the other sort of cardinal times of the year. So this is the same map for June 21st. And if you sort of flip back between those 2 maps, they're not entirely spatially aligned, you can see the effects of topography are much stronger in March than they are in June. And that reflects just that the sun angles are much higher in June than they are in March. And you can also see the effects of vegetation phenology there. So the aspen forest leafs out between March and June, and that affects the amount of solar radiation that propagates through the canopy. So that's just one example of additional data products that we've released for that UER domain. These are also potential insolation. Oh, sorry, I talked about that. We've also estimated winter and summer travel time throughout this entire domain. And this is interestingly like both on trail and off trail, assuming that people travel a certain speed on roads, a certain other speed on trails, and a certain other speed off trail that's dependent on slope and land cover. If you put all that information together, you can actually come up with a really good estimate of how long it takes to get any particular place in the basin from a starting location. So we've got winter travel times from the center of Crested Butte and summer travel times from the Gothic town site. Amazing to me how much I guess how much of the basin is essentially totally inaccessible because it's too steep. We put travel times for rock outcrops that are more than I think 45 degrees as having very slow transit times, essentially because you're rock climbing. Anyway, so I'm excited about this. It could potentially be helpful for understanding which parts of the landscape are accessible and which parts of the landscape are not efficiently. In the Upper Gunnison domain, we really focused on some of these basic physiographic variables that we previously computed for the Upper East River domain. So we're talking about topography. So we processed a new LiDAR data set that was collected in August of 2019 into a new 1 meter resolution elevation map for the entire basin. This is actually a composite map assembled from a couple of different sources. We had the 2019 LiDAR data from about 85% of the basin, and we were able to fill in the gaps using comparable quality data from 2015 in areas that did not have that data. So essentially, this is better than the 2018 National Ecological Observatory Network LiDAR-based DEM for the Upper East River that we released last year. So even though it covers a much larger area, about 5 times the area, it's comparable resolution and actually has a little bit better other spatial qualities, is a little bit smoother, has a little bit better it's a little bit better dealing with vegetation, dense vegetation artifacts as the original Neon DEM. So I'm excited that I was involved in generating this, and I think it's going to be the go-to elevation product for a lot of our work in this basin going forward. I've also developed a 1 meter resolution land cover map for the whole basin, and that differentiates conifer and deciduous forests at 1 meter resolution with about 96% accuracy. It also maps surface water and all the developed and built environments and irrigated pastures as well. So we have about 11 different land cover classes in this map. And it's a really great resource for filtering the landscape, but really understanding where there are quasi-natural habitats, where there are human-modified habitats, and particularly like where there's forest, where there's meadow, where there's shrubland, and where there's certain basic forest types. So we're hoping in the longer term to develop a more detailed vegetation map for the basin, but this is going to enable a ton of cool science already. So in addition to those land cover and topography products, we've also processed some aerial imagery, in particular, a couple of different rounds of the National Aerial Imagery Program, NAPE imagery, which is super high quality for the basin in 2017 and 2019. And that allows us to come up with some vegetation indices like NDVI at 1 meter resolution. And we've also processed the LiDAR data to give us 3 meter resolution vegetation structure metrics. So things like gap fraction, understory density, 20th percentile, 80th percentile heights. All of those are going to be coming from LiDAR. So this is just an example of what that vegetation structure data set looks like. So we've got, in this case, an RGB composite showing 3 different aspects of vegetation structure. So you can see down, there's kind of a complicated legend on this figure, but essentially the greenness is mapped to canopy cover, red is mapped to canopy height, and blue is mapped to understory cover. So we can see that there's a lot of tall canopy out there, but there's also quite a bit of shorter vegetation, particularly up in the high country. This is the willow shrublands. And this is just fantastically detailed. If we zoom into an area just around the Taylor River near where it enters Spring Creek, we can see the difference between dense conifer stands, which are depicted with green and yellow colors, to open stands that have dense understory that include those sort of blue and more greenish blue colors. So this could be potentially really useful both for understanding the structure of forests, the demography of forests, and also for developing some additional products, which I'll talk about in a minute, which deal with microclimate and other things for which canopy structure has a huge influence. So now we actually essentially know what the forest structure is across the whole basin. And I think we're actually just kind of scratching the surface for what's possible with this data. It's pretty high density LiDAR. It's about 8 to 10 points per meter squared for the whole basin. And that means that you can pull out the heights and crown geometry of individual trees down to a scale of crowns that are 3 or 4 meters squared. And I think that's pretty awesome for a couple different applications. And I'm actually working with some collaborators to use this data set to understand forest dynamics, and especially aspen mortality in the basin. This is with Ben Blonder and a few other collaborators. But like I said, we're just scratching the surface. And if you're really interested in pushing this further, please let me know. All right. So that's the data products. We've developed a new set of baseline data sets for that Upper Gunnison domain. We've also developed a couple of what we're calling thematic base maps. And these are, instead of data, they're actually just like pictures of data. They're styled maps that you can use to overlay your own data on. You can sort of imagine this as like Google Maps on steroids, right? So we've developed a couple of these themes. This is the land cover theme that's developed using that new high resolution land cover layer. And this is the area just around the Gothic town site. You can see roads and trails and open meadows, areas that are kind of yellowish, aspen forest that's green, light green, conifer forest that's dark green, and it's overlaid on a hillshade. And if you kind of squint, you can see some topo lines that we've thrown in there. This is a nice base map for overlaying discrete things on it or using it for backcountry navigation. It's a little bit busy for overlaying scientific data sets, but we've also included some planar maps that are just hill shaded topography and things like that. Yeah, we're hoping that these are useful. They certainly have been for me in my own work, and we want to share them with the community at large. Here's just another example of one of those data sets. This is what we're calling a hydro theme. And we're on there mapping at very high resolution all of the surface water that's there. We've also overlain that on a flow accumulation layer and a topographic moisture index layer that's sort of a height above stream channel moisture index. And this is really, really useful for understanding which parts of the landscape are wet. And of course, that's a dynamic thing. So you can sort of imagine this as like wet early in the season and dry early in the season. Essentially, everything is dry late in the season except for the permanent water. But if you wanted to set up field sites that are along a hydrographic gradient, this hydro theme might actually be really useful in the field for scouting out field sites. The underlying data sets that contributed to this hydro theme are also released as data products. But sometimes it helps to have somebody else just assemble all the data sets together, so you don't have to spend as much time making a map that shows what you want, that looks good. All right, so those are the thematic base maps for the Upper Gunnison Basin. They're the underlying data sets are at 1 meter resolution, and the thematic base maps are highly compressed JPEGs at 2 meter resolution. So they're not quite as sharp as the original data, but they'll serve for a lot of purposes. We've also created imagery base maps for the Gothic town site. And this is based on some drone imagery that I've been collecting over the past couple of years. Essentially, we fly a drone every week at the Gothic town site and process the imagery into orthomosaics. And I just have pulled out 6 of those here that represent the town site at different times of year. This is May 25th, June 17th, July 22nd, August 25th, September 27th, and November 25th. Oh, sorry, that should be 15th rather. And that just really shows just how dynamic the vegetation and snow situation is in this landscape. You know, that things really transform themselves from May 25th to July 25th, and then again from July 25th to September and August. Oh, sorry, August and September. It's really kind of cool to see. This is 3 centimeter imagery, and so you can really zoom in to see. In some cases, you can see the individual field plots on this imagery. And we think that's pretty cool. We have a huge library of imagery. So these are 6 out of something like 55 mosaics that I've generated of the Gothic town site. And it is kind of, it's a big lift to make all of that imagery available to the community. And we're actually working pretty hard on trying to understand exactly how to do this. We're probably going to use a system called a spatiotemporal asset catalog, so that it's possible for you to sort of filter and find exactly the right imagery. But it's taken us longer than we thought to get that infrastructure up and running. So we decided to go ahead and post 6 of those snapshot base maps to start to give people a sense of what the seasonal cycle looks like in different parts of this field site area. So that's also new and available. All right, I'm going to pause really quick and see if anybody's got any questions about the data sets that have been released so far before I start talking about the future.
Hi, Ian, this is Corey. I have a quick question.
Sure.
I was browsing through a couple of these while you were talking, and I'm wondering, are you going to be issuing DOIs for these for easier citability?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We are submitting these to ESS Dive sometime in the next month or so. It turns out to be a little bit challenging to navigate all the different aspects here. We've got networks of collaborators that disagree over what research artifacts are DOI-able and which ones are not. And I'm pushing to get as much of this stuff DOI'd as possible so it's citable. And that means that something like an elevation map is definitely going to get a DOI. Something like a phenology map is definitely going to get a DOI. But something that's a slight derivative of an existing data set, like if we made a slope map based on an elevation map, that may or may not get its own DOI. It might just be part of a package with other data. But Corey, I'm glad you mentioned it's something that we're working on pretty hard, and I'm hoping to get some of the first data sets DOI'd in the next couple of weeks.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. Any other questions before we move on? All right, let's talk about the future. What's coming? There are 2 main things that are on my plate this year. And the first is we're really buckling down with satellite imagery. So the satellites that have the most detailed, publicly available, highest quality observations of the land surface are Landsat 8, which is operated by the US Geological Survey, and Sentinel-2, which is operated by the European Space Agency. And so we're going to put these 2 data sets together with some drone imagery that we're collecting to develop very high resolution snow and land surface phenology products that cover the last few years, probably from 2016 to the current year. Now, there are some data sets that are already available that use Landsat and Sentinel products. In particular, I want to put your attention towards a new data set that was released last year from Mark Friedel's lab at Boston University. And this is a Landsat and Sentinel-based land surface phenology product. This is just a map of the 50% green up timing in day of year in 2018. So the red colors represent places where this land surface is greening up really early, and the blue colors are where it's greening up really late. So you can see the elevation pattern there, where the higher elevation environments green up later. But you can also see a lot of texture on this map that's associated with different vegetation types, different hydrologic regimes, and some other stuff that I'm still trying to puzzle out. So this is a really great data set, but what we're trying to do is something a little bit more ambitious, and that's actually to develop weekly fractional snow and leaf area index products. Leaf area index is just the amount of leaf area per unit ground area. And it's really useful for modeling ecological processes and also some of the microclimate stuff that I'll talk about next. So we're developing new microclimate maps that incorporate snow dynamics, phenology, and cold air pooling. And the motivation for this is really taking a look at what climate products are available for the basin and comparing them to some field data that we already have. So I've circled here, this is Billy Barr's house. Billy has been collecting meteorological data at Rumble since the 1970s, very high quality instrumentation at his house. And what we can do is actually compare the measurements at his house to some of the gridded products that people use for larger scale analyses. In this case, we're going to look at some graphs for the minimum and maximum summer air temperatures in 2019 from Billy's house and from a gridded product called GridMet. So the measurements at Billy's house are in orange here, and I apologize for the weird graph axis. And the gray is the predicted August 2019 minimum and maximum temperatures from that national scale gridded data product. So this is essentially like using weather station data and a digital elevation map to interpolate what minimum and maximum temperatures were across the whole domain. And so you see some differences, and in a lot of cases, these are actually pretty large. These are like on the order of 3 to 6 degrees Celsius. And some of that is consistent bias. You can see that in the Tmax indications. There's also some really weird stuff going on here. So the minimum temperatures in particular tend to deviate inconsistently from the gridded product. And I think what's going on here is that Gothic is in a cold air pool, and that's particularly active in certain weather conditions. And I think these kinds of processes are fascinating, and they are really, really important for the ecology and biophysical processes that go on in the basin. And so what we want to do is develop some new gridded maps that capture some of this complexity better. And in particular, we want to capture that cold air drainage and pooling effect. And we also want to incorporate the effects of snow and land surface phenology on microclimate. So you can imagine how important these might be for organisms that are hanging out in the landscape, right? They can choose whether they want to be in a shady spot or a sunny spot. They can choose to overwinter or to spend the night in a cold air pool or not in a cold air pool. And so we want to figure out what those spatial patterns of climate are. This is going to be challenging, and we really don't have enough data from weather stations like the ones at Billy's house to make this work. So what we're going to do is continue to install a distributed low-cost sensor network that records data on certain core micrometeorological variables. So this is just a diagram of what those stations are going to look like once they're fully instrumented. So they've got an anemometer, a temperature sensor, a rain gauge, and then some really basic near surface soil monitors as well. So we're getting surface soil moisture, soil temperature at a couple different levels, and then air temperature at a couple of different levels from the system. And equipment cost is about $800 a node, and Rumble has invested quite a bit of money in creating, making it possible for us to build out this system, but we're also in the process of applying for some grants to scale this up even further. This is what some of those stations look like when they're in the field. One of the amazing things about having sensors that are stations that are relatively low cost is we can put them in a lot of different kinds of environments. And that includes really dry ridgetops like this, aspen forests like that, and kind of willow shrublands like this. We can really start to understand what are the near surface conditions that might matter for the biology in these different kinds of microenvironments, and how does that depend on the larger scale climate conditions. So we instrumented 66 of these stations in 2020, and they were evenly split between different kinds of microsites at each of those locations. So the white circles are the places where we instrumented in 2020. And if you zoom in on each of those white circles, there are actually 3 stations in the vicinity of each of those in a topographically exposed kind of ridge site, topographically sheltered cove site, and also a forest site, either coniferous forest or deciduous forest, depending on what's nearby. Yeah, so this is pretty exciting. I've had a chance to visit about 6 of these sites so far this year, and it looks like all the equipment survived the winter, so that's good. And we're gonna really be collecting a lot of data over the next 2 years, and hopefully expand some of that sensor network to include other environments like down near Gunnison and in the Taylor and Ohio Creek drainages. That depends on the whims of the National Science Foundation. We're hoping to hear about a cyber infrastructure grant in the next month or so. And if we get those funds, we're gonna continue to build this network out. I'm also collaborating with some Lawrence Berkeley Lab researchers to add instruments to some of these stations and expand that network. This is with Baptiste Deflon and Haruka Wainwright. So regardless, I think we're probably gonna instrument about 30 more stations this year. This is really going to pay dividends in 2022 and beyond, when we can use this data to develop gridded microclimate maps. All right.
Hey, Ian, I have another quick comment.
Yeah.
So I'll just throw it out there that we are managing a smaller number of sites in the Upper East River Basin with some overlapping measurements. A lot higher resolution soil information, so soil temperature and moisture with depth down to a meter or more, snow depth from down-looking sensors, air temperature, and CO2 monitoring. So those stations are within the Upper East River domain, and we'd be happy to talk about adjusting, the depths or the height above ground that we're making some of these measurements, if it's useful to incorporate those into your network.
Yeah, let's follow up about that. I'm still, I mean, there's so many projects that are all measuring different things, and if we can align those a little bit better to get consistent measurements across a larger number of sites, that's a huge scientific payoff. So yeah, I appreciate you mentioning it. All right. Okay, so how do I discover SDP data sets? The easiest way to do this is using Rumble's data catalog. So this is just a website that's a sort of a subset of Rumble's website. And if you go there, you can see not only the spatial data platform data sets, but also the data sets that are on ESS Dive and a couple of other a couple of other dataset repositories where scientists that work at Rumble have submitted data. But if you click on the tag SDP here, then you're going to get all the datasets that are associated with the spatial data platform. It doesn't. Oh yeah, so we're up to 63 different datasets that are part of the platform. A lot of those are, like some of those are variations on a theme. For example, we have a version of the digital elevation model for the Upper East River that includes buildings and another version that doesn't. But regardless, there's really a gold mine of information here. And so if we wanted to search for something like radiation, then that'll bring up those solar radiation products that I mentioned before. And also the base maps are in here as well. So if you wanted to figure out how to bring this data into an analysis or onto a GIS map, that's something that I'll demo in a bit. But I also wanted to highlight that we also have a current product table data set, which is essentially like an Excel style CSV data set that includes links to the data sets and metadata, and then some really basic information like what the title of the data set is, what the spatial resolution is, what the domain is. So if you want to use the catalog interface to browse data, that's great. But if you wanted to get a high level view of what all is available across the whole system, that current product table is probably where to go. Incidentally, you can also access the product table programmatically via R or Python, which is super helpful for scripting. And like I mentioned before in response to Corey's question, in the long term, these data sets are going to be hosted on ESS Dive, which is an archive of Earth science data sets that's administered by the Department of Energy. This is a really great platform for hosting really large data sets and gives you quite a bit of flexibility in terms of access and metadata and provenance and all this stuff. So in the longer term, that's where to go. But in the near term, we're putting all these up in our own system so that we don't have to wait for things to get DOI'd before they're available to the community. Okay, so how can I access this stuff? I want to distinguish between two different possibilities here. So that are two different types of data. The first are data products. These are scientific measurements that are in a gridded form. And the other are base maps. And so data products are data, and base maps are essentially pictures of data. And we've got some different options for accessing those two different things. Regardless, all of these data sets, both the data products and the base maps, are published in a public Amazon S3 bucket. So if you want to sign up for a free Amazon account, you can actually just like go to that web link and you can browse everything that's there. That's not the most efficient way to download or to get a sense of what data is in there. We'd rather use the data catalog because it gives you a lot more rich information. But anything that you can do with data on a public Amazon S3 bucket, you can do with this data. The data products are stored as what are called cloud optimized geotiffs or COGs. They're essentially files that sit on a server in Amazon S3, and then we can query them and manipulate them directly in GIS programs like QGIS and ArcGIS without downloading them. And this is actually really important for some of these data sets because they're really big. Like the one meter elevation map for the whole Gunnison Basin is something like 12 gigabytes. And that would take a long time to download. And it's just like for the most part, you're not worried about getting high resolution data for the whole domain. You're interested in where your field sites are. So with QGIS or ArcGIS, you can load the cloud-based data sets in, you can zoom into your area of interest, you can clip out data sets and essentially do everything that you can with a local data set using data that's hosted in the cloud. The downside is that performance scales with your internet connection. So if you've got a blazing fiber connection, this works great. If you've got a slow Wi-Fi connection, you might end up looking at a spinning beach ball a lot. Okay, so the same deal is going on with accessing these data sets via R or Python. You can use programmatic. You can get programmatic access to the data sets in the cloud in Python using the rasterio packages. Rasterio package. In R using the raster and Terra and RGDAL packages. And I'm going to demo an example with R and raster in a second. But that's for data products. We have, I think, about 150 gigabytes of data products available through the system so far. And if you're using them for analysis, if you're using them for anything kind of scientific task, this is the place to go. If you're interested in using these data sets as base maps, you've got a couple of more options. Now, you can access these directly via the same tools that we talked about for the data products. But in addition, they're hosted as tiled data sets on our ArcGIS online system. And they are available for adding to field maps and taking out in the field using a really cool app called ArcGIS Field Maps, which I'll demo as well. So this is these are sort of all the ways of accessing the data that I know about. But if you have a way that you really want to use this stuff, that you are understand, like you recognize that there are problems, my job is to try and make this as easy as possible for folks. So get in touch if something doesn't work. Oh, I also wanted to mention that for the base maps that are on ArcGIS Online, any software that can load a tile map service can read from those data sets. Okay, so I wanted to demo here loading some of the base maps and some of the new data products in QGIS, which is a great open source GIS package. So if you want to follow along with us, you need to download and install QGIS, and then there is a map file that is in the materials for this webinar that are hosted on GitHub. And so you need to download that map file and open it up in QGIS. I will say that it took me about 3 minutes for that map to load, so be patient. But in the meantime, I'm going to just go over there. It's like a cooking show. I can just flip straight over there because I've loaded it already. So this is what the map looks like. This is that land cover base map. We've got a couple of layers preloaded here, and I'll go through them kind of step by step. We've got some regional base maps that are from sources like Google Maps and the US Geological Survey. So if you turn everything off, you can see this really nice USGS hillshade layer. This is based on National Elevation Dataset data, so it looks great at this scale, but it's pretty cruddy if you zoom in to
Ian, we can't see the map. We still see your PowerPoint.
Oh, thanks. I thought I had solved this problem, but apparently not. All right, can you see the map?
Yes, yeah.
Great, thanks. Okay, so when you open the map up, it's going to look something like this. And I just want to highlight that we've got USGS hillshade layers in there. If you wanted to get satellite imagery from Google Maps, that's also in there, but it's kind of shaded out because I want to highlight the base maps that I've generated. And yeah, so we've got a variety of these base maps. So this is a hillshade base map that we've generated based on the new LiDAR data. It's just kind of fantastically detailed topography. We can zoom way in to get some of the cliffs on Gothic Mountain. You can also see some of the topo lines that we added to that map to make it a little clearer what the overall trend was. I've also included in this map roads and trails layer and a landmarks and place names layer. So these are also hosted on cloud-based locations. So it's sort of pulling data from the cloud when it's displaying, say, that label for Gothic Mountain right there. So we've got hillshade, we've got land cover, we've got that 2019 NAPE imagery. This is actually great because the NAPE imagery is much better georeferenced than some of the other imagery that's available. So if you compare it particularly to Esri's base map imagery, Esri's imagery is off by sometimes as much as 10 meters or so. But NAPE is pretty good in this domain. And then we've also got that hydro base map that we looked at before that shows the relatively wet and relatively dry spots around the landscape. Now, remember, these are very large data sets that are hosted in the cloud. So sometimes they will take a little bit of time to load. If things get too boggy, you can always just download the data sets and add them to the map locally if you've got the disk space to do that. All right, so what I want to do is just really briefly overlay some of the information that we can get from the data catalog on one of these base maps. So this is that canopy structure base map that we were looking at before that has different aspects of vegetation canopy structure mapped to different colors. So what I want to do is overlay a map of solar radiation onto this map. So I'm going to go back to a web browser and search for radiation in the data catalog. And let's just look for radiation in the fall. So subcanopy potential solar radiation for day of year 265. This is the fall equinox in this, well, yeah, that's the fall equinox. Okay, so to add a data set to our map in QGIS, the only thing we need to do is copy and paste the URL for the data set itself. So there's a link here that says download data set. So if you right click on that and just go to copy link address, and you navigate back to QGIS, and you go to a menu layer, and then add layer, add raster layer. You should be able to just paste that web address into the raster dataset field and hit add. And you'll see the spinning beach ball. So what QGIS is doing in this case is downloading the header information from that file. It's a few megabytes of data that describes how it's organized internally, and then also some of the lower resolution representations of the data. So this really shouldn't take that long for most of these data sets, although it does scale with the size of the data. So if some of the data sets that are at 1 meter that are 10 or 12 gigabytes, you might need to go grab a snack and come back, but they will eventually show. All right. I guess while we're waiting, any questions about the process of adding data or finding data? All right. Cool. So this is now we've got the data set loaded in the table of contents. We can see it. We can see the spatial patterns here. Dark colors represent low potential insolation. Light colors represent high potential insolation. We can actually query this map using the tools in QGIS. So if you hit the I button and click on one of these dark slopes over here on the side of Snodgrass Mountain, you can see this hillside gets 1,600 or so watt hours per meter squared of solar radiation in the fall. And you can just go across the valley and grab the number from one of these south-facing hillsides. And man, yeah, this is essentially getting 5 times the amount of energy from the sun transited to the subcanopy as that shaded spot in Snodgrass. So essentially, we can treat this data just as if it were local. So we can do raster calculator math on it. We can export it in any format we want. We can query it. We can come up with spatial summaries, and yeah, we don't have to go through the trouble of downloading the whole thing. I'm just gonna really quickly change the color scale to something that's a little bit more appealing. And yeah, so this is essentially like a local data set, but it's not, it's living on the cloud. So there are a ton of different processing tools that you can use in QGIS. It's a very, I guess, full-featured GIS program. But for serious analysis, you're probably going to want to do that programmatically using R or Python, and that's what I'm going to demo in a little bit. But first, I wanted to demo actually how to get to these data sets in ArcGIS Online, and then how to take them out into the field with you. So I'm going to show that data catalog again. And I can go back to, we're actually going to look for some of the base maps here. Yeah, so let's take a look at this May 25th drone image from the Gothic town site. And so for the base maps here, we've actually got another option on the left-hand side, which is now View Web Map. So we can click on that link, and it's going to bring up the version of the map that's hosted in ArcGIS Online. So if I hit Open in Map Viewer, it's going to load this tiled data set on top of an existing base map from ArcGIS. And I think the thing is, like, we can zoom way in here. Like, this is a very high resolution mosaic, and we can also overlay things on top of it. If we were logged into the ArcGIS Online system, it would give us lots more options. In this viewer, we can actually only just kind of explore data sets. We can't do much else. But we have, I think Rumble has about 50 different student licenses for ArcGIS. So if you're interested in using this platform for any of your mapping tasks, get in touch with us, because we can get you credentials that allow you to do all sorts of cool stuff with ArcGIS Online. It's not my platform of choice. I tend to gravitate towards open source tools, but I realize that ArcGIS is sort of all over the place. So we definitely want to support it. Cool. So this is just kind of a basic web map, but I also wanted to demo how to put this onto a mobile device. So the app that we want to use is called ArcGIS Field Maps, and let's see, I can show you that in a second. So this is a cross-platform application that's available on the Android platform from the Google Play Store, and on iOS or iPadOS in the App Store. So if you want to follow along with us, you just need to download and install that ArcGIS Field Maps app onto your mobile device. And you can actually skip, it'll ask you to sign in. You'll get more features if you sign in using ArcGIS Online credentials, which you can ask us for if you're interested. But you can also skip the sign-in process, and it'll allow you to access these maps as well. So I'm actually going to transfer over to showing what's going on my mobile device, and I have done this a couple times, but hopefully it will work. All right. Let's see. I think I need to change my screen sharing around so that's possible. All right, you guys should see a cartoon of a cell phone on my screen. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Great. All right. So if I open up that Field Maps app, it's going to take a second to load, and then it's going to ask you to sign in. But if you don't see that immediately, that's fine. Oh, it looks like that's no longer updating. Hold on, I'm going to try sharing my screen again. No, I'm still stuck. So this was working when I tried it out before, but it looks like, oh, there we go. All right. So now we've got the interface for ArcGIS field maps, and you can just hit the button for search and search for RMBL research. And you should see a couple of different options here. The one that that I think you should choose is Rumble Research Siting Map - Public. So that's the one with the new base maps in it. And so now we've got a mobile map that has actually a bewildering number of different data sets in there. So if I go to hit the table of contents, I can scroll through all the different layers that are loaded here. The kind of funny yellow lines are all the research sites that we manage as part of our research management system. So if you've taken a GPS out into the field and GPSed something and then turned the data into Shannon, it usually ends up on this map. We can turn that off to see the base maps a little bit better. Oops. And the base maps we've got are that 2019 National Aerial Imagery Program data, and then a July 22nd drone image. So now we can zoom sort of all the way in to this very high resolution map, and you can actually like those little dots there. Those are monument plants. Those are green gentians. They have a big flowering stalk in 2019. So this is great. You can get imagery that's down to the scale of individual plants. Of course, we only have that imagery where we have drone images, so just for the town site. I can also turn that layer off and turn on some of the other base maps. So let me turn back on that land cover base map that we were looking at before. And turn off the drone images. Great, so now we have, oops. Oh no, I've done something terrible. We ended up in Eastern Europe. Okay, now we're back in Gunnison. We can see, yeah, this is that high resolution land cover layer. We can see the buildings and the paved areas, along with some of the other data sets. And, oh, I think we've lost live updating of that screen. Okay, well, that's super lame, but I can at least report that this is feasible. The cool thing about ArcGIS field maps is that it really makes it pretty straightforward to take maps into the field. So you can define offline areas for download, and you can and then you can take it into areas that don't have cell phone reception, which I think is pretty great. Yeah, so that's a new way to interact with some of the data products that I've generated, and that's the sort of second of 3 demos. I did want to, as a last, I guess, a last demo, really reiterate sort of all the ways that we can interact with these data sets programmatically in R. So I'm just going to demo that really quick. It's I think similar in some ways to the demo that I did for webinar 1, but it includes some of the new data sets and has a little bit of a different focus. So I'm going to give things back over to R. And we're going to be working through a script that's part of that, the materials for this webinar that are up on GitHub. So if you open up code, you open up analyze sagebrush distribution.r, then you're going to get a script that works with some field data that we collected. And so the question here is really, how can we use some of these data sets to better understand plant distributions? So this is a field data set that we're going to look at. That's a bunch of places where people went out in the field and recorded what plants were there and what plants were not there. And we're going to, at those locations, then pull down from the cloud spatial data platform data sets to see what the correlations are between plant distributions and environmental variables are. So I'm going to set this up by loading a couple of packages and then setting the working project directory. And so this should work with a wide variety of different versions of R. The packages that are linked to this underlying software GDAL need to be, I think, 2.2.3 or later, but you'd have to be running a really old version of R for that to be a problem. So what we're going to do is just include the paths to these data sets as variables. So this is a path that leads to one of those data sets. So this is something that we can copy and paste from the data catalog directly into our script. So instead of download data set, you'd right click and say copy link, and then come back and copy this there. We've also added a special string to the beginning of this, /VSI curl, and that just is a signal to the RGDAL package that we want to use that cloud-based file system to access stuff that's not local. So we can create those 3 different paths representing 3 different data products. This is going to be a 2018 snow depth product from the Airborne Snow Observatory. This is a LiDAR-based snow depth product. That gives us a snow depth at just about the peak of snow in 2018, which incidentally was not too different from the way that snowpack looks this year. We're going to take one of those potential solar radiation products, in this case, the spring solar radiation, and also elevation to give us a little bit more context. So we can just define strings that represent the paths to those data sets. And then we can just use the raster function to create raster representations of the data represented online. So this isn't going to download the data; it's just going to download the header and allow us to we now have an R object that we can use to interact with that cloud-based data set. So it's got raster objects have all sorts of useful things that you can grab from them. If we were to say summary snow 2018. We would get, oh, actually that might be a bad idea. That's gathering summary data. It might actually have to download the whole thing. Eek. Yep, this is why you sometimes need to terminate R. Okay, but we can get back in there pretty quickly. Yep, so we just typed snow 2018. Oops. Oh, sorry. We have to run those lines again. We type snow 2018. That gives us some summary information. So it tells us that this is a raster layer that has 64 million pixels, and that's actually quite large. It's yep, got a coordinate system, got some names and stuff. So the important thing is that this is now an object that we can use to query. So if we load our field data, which we can use, this is just a CSV like any other data set. We can load our field data and then give it geographic coordinates, in this case, longitude and latitude. Yeah, and then let's take a look at this. So what's the structure of plot GPS? I want to get something in the data slot. So that is, yeah, so this is just an Excel style spreadsheet that has information about those points. The important thing here is that we've got a class column that has a bunch of different potential categories that we can use to classify our landscape. Some of those are from field data. Some of those are from heads-up digitizing on drone imagery or aerial imagery. And the important thing is that this is essentially a good sample of the landscape, and we can use the tools here to then grab the raster values at those coordinates. The first thing we have to do is to reproject our data to the same coordinate system as the SDP data products. And so that's what we're doing here. So we've got this proj4 string function, which pulls the projection information from that raster object. So if we run that, we can actually just see what that proj4 string is. There's a website called spatialreference.org that if you don't know what your string should be for a particular coordinate system, you can look it up at that website. But this string is just what is represented by longitude and latitude WGS84 geographic coordinates. So that's the coordinate system that our locations are in. And then you can compare that to the coordinate system of the raster object. So that's going to be UTM zone 13 north. This is essentially a universal transverse Mercator UTM coordinate system. So we need to get our original data, our field data, into the same coordinate system as the raster data. We can do that using a function called SP transform, and we run that. It will return a new object. This is a new spatial points data frame that includes different coordinates that now match up to the raster object. So now the CRS that is reported by this data set is identical to the coordinate system of the raster. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is sample rasters at our plot locations. So we're going to use a function called extract to do this, and it it's pretty straightforward. We're going to give it a raster object as the first argument, and then the data set as a spatial points data frame that we want to sample as the second data set. You can also add polygons here, in which case you can summarize rasters in a particular polygon area. You've got to specify what function you want to use to summarize the data if you do that. But we've just got points, and we just want to grab the raster value at each one of those points. So I'm going to use the extract function with the method equals simple. That's just going to give us the pixel value that's closest to the point. And this might take a little bit of time. Remember, what it's doing is for about 2,000 points, it's reaching out to the server and say, give me that pixel. But it has to go through the index process to do so. It's not instantaneous, unfortunately. And this does not scale, unfortunately, to tens or hundreds of thousands of points. So if you really want to do a large scale analysis where you're extracting a huge number of pixels, you actually do need to download the data sets locally to make that work. So, it's taking something on the order of 20 or 30 seconds per raster with 2,000 points. But if you scale that to 20,000 or 200,000 points, yeah, you'd have to essentially let it run overnight to get the data. So depending on how patient you are, you can do this cloud-based system, or you can go and download the data sets locally, in which case this happens probably about an order of magnitude more quickly once the data sets are downloaded. Any questions while we're sort of waiting for this extraction method to finish?
I was kind of curious if you have ground truthing for some of the further out sites, or just through the basin, if there's sort of maybe a random ground truthing for some of the plant data.
Yeah, so this data set in particular is a compilation of a couple different ones. One is the field surveys that were done for the field campaign associated with the NEON AOP data collection in 2018. And then I've supplemented that with some data that was heads-up digitized from drone imagery from about half a dozen different sites across the basin. But I will say we don't sort of have a really great spatial sample of field data on vegetation across the whole domain. And I think if in the longer term, it might make sense to think about how do we go about collecting that systematic sample of vegetation for mapping purposes? Because really, it's been so far mostly opportunistic, combining data sets from a couple of different more focused local studies into a global data set. But it would be awesome to have a super well referenced, spatially balanced vegetation field data set. We started collecting some of that data in 2018 and 2019. We didn't have the field bandwidth to do that in 2020, mostly because we were understaffed because of the pandemic. And I know that there are quite a few different research groups that are collecting veg data, and so I think there's a real opportunity to potentially do some more coordination there. But as it is, it's sort of a mishmash. So I'll actually plot these GPS coordinates, or sorry, we'll plot this data set so we can see the spatial distribution. Oh wow, that is, yeah, there's something going on with the scaling there. But yeah, if you're interested, you can actually pull that data set directly into QGIS and explore to see exactly where the points were collected. It's a bit of a mismatch. All right, so it looks like we've now got raster values at all of those points. So let's view this data set. So it looks just like it did before, except yeah, now we've got some new columns that have values that are taken from the raster data. And it doesn't tell us exactly what the units are here. I know from previous experience that the snow depth is measured in meters, so that's 1.8 meters. Solar radiation is in watt hours per meter squared. Elevation is in meters above sea level. But if you were curious about what the units were or any other stuff about the data set, the place to go is the metadata. So in the data catalog, there's a link to the metadata for each of those data sets, and it's worth spending some time understanding what exactly you're measuring here. Cool. But we're all set up to be able to do some plots. So let's just do a really simple scatter plot that compares the distribution of sagebrush to those environmental variables. So sagebrush is a collection of species in the genus Artemisia, and it's actually the only Artemisia species that are in this data set. So we can just subset, we can create a new variable that represents whether or not the class column is equal to Artemisia. And then we can use that for plotting. I've also created one for willow as well as salix, in case you wanted to play around with it yourself. Yeah, but let's just take a look at this. What is the distribution of sagebrush with respect to snow depth and potential solar radiation here. All right, so on this plot, the places with sagebrush are blue dots, and the places without sagebrush are kind of these pale red dots. And on the x-axis is potential insolation, and the y-axis is March 31st, 2018 snow depth. And one of the things that comes out of this for me is that you really don't see much sagebrush in environments that have deep snow. And that lines up with my field experience. Of course, you tend to see sagebrush in lower elevation environments, particularly lower elevation environments that are kind of dry. And one of the reasons why they're dry is they don't get much snow. But interestingly, you don't see it as much in environments that have the highest potential solar radiation. So essentially, the south-facing steep slopes are not where you tend to find sagebrush. And interestingly, those I think are places where you get domination from other plant communities. Sagebrush tends to be on the sort of alluvial, sorry, not on the alluvial, on the foot slopes that don't get much snow, but are also not sort of directly facing south. So that's just kind of a plot. We can also fit a really simple species distribution model using this data. In this case, I'm using a function called GAM. This fits a generalized additive model. And this is, plotting sagebrush, essentially the probability of being sagebrush as a smooth function of solar radiation and snow. And then we can predict the probability of sagebrush from this model using the expand.grid and predict functions. And and we can use that to create another plot. And so in this case, the warm colors, the red colors, are high sagebrush probabilities, and the cool colors here are low sagebrush probabilities. So the intuition that we had from staring at this data at the start seems to be pretty spot on. We see high probabilities of sagebrush at low values of snow depth, and and the probability of sagebrush at high values of snow depth is pretty low. So this is not a super impressive analysis, I have to be honest. But you can imagine taking exactly the same workflow and creating spatial predictions for a variety of different ecological processes or species distributions, soil properties, things like that. And so I think that my point is that just this type of analysis is feasible with the spatial data platform tools. And I'm really just getting started with trying to understand exactly all the different ways that this data can be put to use. My hope is that the research community at Rocky Mountain Biological Lab is going to come up with clever things that I haven't thought of, and then I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. But that's the third and final demo. And we're about done here. I'm running pretty close to the end of my time. The one thing that I did want to emphasize before we go is to please fill out this webinar survey. It'll take about 5 minutes to complete, and will give us invaluable information that's going to make the next seminar series that we do even better. So please do that. And so I'm going to stop the recording here in a second, but feel free to stick around and ask questions as they come up. And yeah, and it was really great to have such engaged people join me for these seminars, and I appreciate you guys spending essentially, I think, a total of about 9 hours with just me talking. And this is not the ideal pedagogical situation, but we're hoping to expand this into more avenues and do more in-person workshops in the future. So thanks, and I will go ahead and stop the recording.